In her celebrated 2006 graphic memoir, Fun Home, Alison Bechdel recounts her first encounter with what would eventually become her identity. My realization at 19 that I was a lesbian came about in a manner consistent with my bookish upbringing, a revelation not of the flesh, but of the mind. Unlike Bechdel, my first queer encounter was not in print. Though my childhood home did have the luxury of a physical dictionary, I have no memories of its use. Instead, I explored much wilder territory, the internet. As a member of the first crop of what we now call digital natives, there is a much more vast and open world of knowledge available to me than any previous generation. While the family computer was situated next to the laundry room for easy surveillance, my parents did not hover over my shoulder, and I knew before they did how to clear a browser history. A Google search for the word lesbian is quite different than looking it up in a dictionary. It does not lead to a single definition, but into a near infinite labyrinth of possibility. You go from hyperlink to video to image to MP3 and back again. Sappho and Lorraine Hansberry and The Children's Hour and L7 all occupy the same space, the same moment in time even, or rather, the same moment in someone's time. There is a distinct tension in the digital temporal, a push and pull between the individual and the collective. The experience of coming out, or perhaps more accurately, to come in to queerness, has always been intensely personal, and yet still something that is shared by its very nature. When queer people talk to each other about our lives, we talk less about moments fixed in time, but ones that shift back and forth. What movie did you watch that made you realize you weren't straight? Once upon a time, the answer to this question would immediately date you. But this is no longer the case. You can watch any movie at any time, at any place, with anyone, even with people you haven't even met IRL. Because trauma can be unspeakable and unrepresentable, and because it is marked by forgetting and dissociation, it often seems to leave behind no records at all. Trauma puts pressure on conventional forms of documentation, representation, and commemoration, giving rise to new genres of expression such as testimony, and new forms of monuments, rituals, and performances that can call into being collective witnesses and publics. It thus demands an unusual archive, whose materials, in pointing to trauma's ephemerality, are themselves ephemeral. Possibility is not good material for writing traditional history. I mean, of course, history with the capital H. While the foundations of this project are in film and media studies, the engagement at the heart of my work here is in the writing of queer history. A major inspiration and influence in the conception of this project was Laura Doan's 2013 book, Disturbing Practices: History, Sexuality, and Women's Experience of Modern War. Doan writes in Disturbing Practices of the difficulty of contact between queer theory and the practice of gay and lesbian critical historiography, of the argument and perhaps artificial separations between the disciplines. She also writes about the frustration and grief of looking for things that are, by design, absent from the archives. Those emotions are the ones that have haunted me in my work, and ones that, this time at least, I wanted to work with. Thus, my intention with Haraway's Basement was first to create a haunted archive, one that can encompass new forms, engage with the most recent past, and perhaps most importantly, survive. While it's true that the internet is no more permanent than other older collections, perhaps even less so as digital dark age doomsayers have argued, it does have its own unique fluidity. It is constantly changing and shifting, expanding even as it disappears. It's confused, it's confusing. It's almost completely incomprehensible. What I'm really thinking about here is the future of Twitter and Tumblr. How will they exist in a queer future? Will meaning be stripped entirely, the future historian left only with scraps of image and text? I think this is possible, but I don't think that it has to be considered pessimistically. There is something to be said about the elastic quality of digital meaning, about its ability to snap back when pulled away. What can be done to record this, to reproduce these layers upon layers? I admit that I found it difficult to create a presentation for Haraway's Basement, both because my artistic practice itself was purposely ambiguous, even combatively so, but also because the feelings and experiences themselves cannot quite be captured in a single text. I have been frustrated in my academic career with the inadequacy of even the loosest and most radical theoretical writing. It could perhaps communicate ideas, but it could not transmit feelings. Nor could the academic text quite get to the meat, no pun intended, of the medium problem of media writing. It has always seemed somehow inappropriate to me to explore something as immaterial as the moving image through something as firmly object-based as the academic text. Film studies as a discipline had its conception in English departments. We do, of course, study a text in film studies, even if no writing makes an appearance. This has been sufficient up until a point, but as several scholars besides myself have pointed out, it is very quickly falling apart. I behold the breaking down of a world that has reached its borders, fainting away. The corpse, seen without God and outside of science, is the utmost of abjection. It is death infecting life, abject. It is something rejected from which one does not part, from which one does not protect oneself as from an object. Imaginary uncanniness and real threat, it beckons to us and ends up engulfing us. I have not yet answered the question as to why I specifically chose horror as the generic focus of this project. Horror is about tension and about transgression. It's almost inherently queer. Or maybe queerness is inherently horrific. The title of Laura Doan's book comes from real descriptions of lesbianism. A woman loving another woman is the titular disturbing practice. Monsters are almost routinely queer-coded. Queerness is, of course, contagion. Queerness is against nature. Queerness is disgusting. Queerness is predatory. Carmilla was a modern West's first vampire, and perhaps also its first lesbian. The thing about lesbianism or bisexuality, or really any form of queerness in women, is that it is inextricably tied to madness. What other reason could cause a woman to act so unreasonably, to lash out and refuse to be comforted? Why doesn't she want marriage, want family, want to be swallowed up and spit out by the male gaze? She has to be crazy. A brutal historical truth is that queer women have felt the violence of the psychiatric system, perhaps more than any other group. And the chant of horror is simple. You're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy. I could have made an audio file of every time that phrase is spoken in the films I watched for this project, but I think that would be a little tedious. It would also be redundant labor, for me at least. I can hear the chant wherever I go. I don't need a record, and I don't want one. This is one thing I would prefer to keep out of the archive. Really, this is all about hysteria. You're screaming, you're crying, you're a psychosexual mess. Hysteria, no matter the gender of the sufferer, carries a distinctly feminine edge. Madness is your reality crashing up against the reality of others. This is an experience intensely familiar to many women, mentally ill or not. As the journalist Sophie Haywood writes, the older I get, the more I see how women are described as having gone mad when what they've actually become is knowledgeable and powerful and fucking furious. While her words have a definite useful punch to them, I don't actually completely agree with Haywood. Madness is not only a metaphor for female rebellion, it is also something very real and very painful. It is also mental illness. And as Susan Sontag wrote in 1978, illness is not a metaphor. But the problem is, somehow, it still is. What is the difference between being mad and being convinced that you are mad? I'm not sure that I can personally discern the line. I think the problem is one of embodiment. An investigation into the history of psychiatry and psychology reveals that mental illness has always had somatic attachments. These somatic attachments often cross into the queer. Lesbianism, bisexuality, and homosexuality have all been understood as symptoms of psychological sickness, if not exactly the sickness itself. So too does this follow the history of madness and horror. The body reflects the mind. creating grotesque and monstrous visages, a look that is terrifying in its brazen ugliness. But the mind also reflects the body, and beauty is also terror. Despite the name drop in the title of my project, I have not yet mentioned Donna Haraway even once. I suppose I have been leading up to her. My work does follow in the wake of her enormously influential essay, A Cyborg Manifesto, where she describes the cyborg as, and I quote, a condensed image of both imagination and material reality, the two joined centers structuring any possibility of historical transformation. My intention with this project was to follow this figure of the cyborg into darker territory, deep into the garish and the uncomfortable and the beguiling and the disgusting. What happens in the joining of the imagined and the material? It can't always be an easy coupling. This is what has led me to the basement. Here are the inconvenient memories, the things that do not fit and probably were never made to, and yet here still are the things you can't quite bring yourself to get rid of. But perhaps, after your death, stripped of context and unpleasant associations, they might be of use to someone else. The actual physical, and I'm using the term physical in the loosest possible terms, form for Haraway's Basement is a twine game, essentially a text-image-based choose-your-own-adventure. In my attempt to create a haunted archive, I reproduced my experience as a viewer and as a writer and as a person attempting to navigate a world that is often intensely hostile, if not outright violent, to me and people like me. In my attempt to create a haunted archive, I reproduced my experience as a viewer, a writer, and as a person attempting to navigate a world that is often intensely hostile, if not outright violent, to me and people like me. It has a narrative structure, though I am cautious in calling it narrative fiction. It is chiefly and most obviously about my viewings of 29 horror films. It moves from memory to impression, from measured analysis to brazenly subjective commentary. There are a few jokes. As a consequence of its structure, it doesn't lend itself to a presentation in this context, but I invite you all to engage with it nonetheless. I think also, before I end, it's important for me to name those who made this project possible, even if they are not directly cited in my body of text. Some of the people I know personally, most I do not. In making a queer feminist archive, I think I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge who supported me, who inspired me, and whose work came before mine.